The first time I realized my family could erase me without raising their voices was at my younger sister's wedding rehearsal dinner. I remember it clearly because it was the first night in years I had worn a dress instead of my usual jeans and blazer. The kind of choice you make when you still believe appearances matter. My name is Evelyn Parker. I was 31 that year, old enough to have learned better, young enough to still hope I was wrong. The room was warm, crowded with voices, and the smell of roasted chicken and wine I couldn't afford but didn't have to pay for. My parents sat at the head of the long table, my mother in pearl earrings she only wore for events that were meant to be remembered, my father leaning back, arms crossed, satisfied in the way men get when everything is proceeding exactly as planned. My sister Lauren stood beside her fiancé, glowing, already speaking, as if the future had been signed and notarized. People clinked glasses. Laughter rose and fell. I sat near the end of the table, close enough to hear, far enough to be forgotten. Then my mother stood. She tapped her glass lightly with a spoon and smiled, the smile she had perfected over decades. The one that suggested warmth while warning against interruption. "We're so proud of you, Lauren," she said. "And as part of welcoming you both into this next chapter, your father and I want to make something clear." She looked at him. He nodded. "The house on Maple Crest," my father continued, "will officially be transferred into your names after the wedding. It's only right. You're starting a family." Applause. Cheers. Someone said how generous they were. Someone else joked about grandkids. I felt my chest tighten, not because I wanted the house, but because I hadn't known there was anything to announce. I waited for the rest, for the part where they mentioned me, for the sentence that would explain where I stood in this carefully staged moment. It never came. Instead, my mother raised her glass again, and to continuity, to keeping things within the family. I smiled, because that's what I'd been trained to do. Smile when confused. Smile when hurt. Smile so no one has to ask questions. That was the first hook. The first small moment that didn't feel small at all. 2 weeks later, I learned that the family business I had helped keep afloat for 5 years had been quietly restructured without me. I worked as operations manager at Parker & Sons Holdings, a modest but profitable real estate management company my parents had built from the ground up. Or rather, my father liked to say he had built it. My mother managed the books. I managed everything else that required staying late, fixing mistakes, smoothing conflicts, and answering emails at midnight. Lauren had never worked there. She had other interests, lifestyle things, influencer-adjacent projects that never quite materialized, but always required family support. One Monday morning, I arrived early, coffee in hand, ready to go over quarterly maintenance reports. The office was quiet. Too quiet. My brother Daniel's door was closed. That was unusual. He liked to keep it open, liked to be seen. I logged into the system and was greeted by a message I had never seen before. Access restricted. I tried again. Same message. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at the screen as if it might change its mind. Daniel emerged from his office, then jacket already on. He looked surprised to see me, which was strange, considering I had worked there every weekday for half a decade. "Oh," he said, "you're here early." Apparently, I replied, "I can't access the system." He hesitated, just long enough. "That's probably because Dad wanted to simplify things," he said. "New structure, fewer hands in the pot." "I manage operations," I said. "That is literally my role." He shrugged. "Not anymore." He didn't sound angry or cruel. He sounded relieved. I went into my parents' office next. My mother was already there, filing papers into neat stacks. She didn't look up when I entered. "What's going on?" I asked. She sighed softly, like I had interrupted something trivial. Evelyn, don't make this harder than it needs to be. Harder than what? She finally looked at me then. Her expression was calm, measured, as if she were explaining a weather forecast. Your father and I think it's time you step back. Focus on your own life. I am focused on my life, I said. This is my job. It was, she corrected. But things change. Lauren needs support now. Daniel is stepping up. And honestly, you've always been so independent. You'll be fine. There it was, the word that had followed me my entire life, like a compliment that behaved more like a warning. Independent. It meant they didn't worry about me. It meant they didn't plan for me. It meant I could be removed without discussion. Am I being fired? I asked. My father appeared in the doorway then, as if summoned by the question. He looked tired, irritated. Let's not use dramatic language, he said. Your family. But yes, your role is no longer necessary. No paperwork, no meeting, no acknowledgement of the years I had poured into keeping their company solvent during slow seasons when tenants defaulted and banks pressed. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because something inside me had gone very quiet. That night, I went back to my apartment and sat on the edge of my bed with my coat still on. I stared at the wall until the sun went down. My phone buzzed once. A message from Lauren. Can't wait for you to stand next to me on Saturday. Maid of honor stuff tomorrow. I didn't reply. It wasn't anger that filled me then. It was something colder. The slow understanding that love, in my family, had always come with conditions. And those conditions had just been revised. I opened my laptop and pulled up the shared family folder I still had access to. Not business files, personal ones. Scans of old documents my grandmother had asked me to organize years ago because you're the responsible one. That was when I saw it. A file labeled Will Updated Final TDF, dated 3 months earlier. I clicked it, and that was when the second hook set in deeper this time. I didn't open the will right away. That might sound strange, but some instincts don't come from logic. They come from years of learning when to brace yourself. I stared at the file name, as if it were a living thing, something that might change shape once touched. Will Updated Final PDF. Final is such a confident word. It assumes consent. It assumes agreement. It assumes everyone was present when the ending was written. I closed the laptop and went to bed without undressing. I didn't sleep much. Every time I drifted off, I dreamed of doors closing, softly, not slammed, not locked, just gently pushed until the latch clicked and I was on the wrong side without noticing when it happened. The next morning, I made coffee and sat at the small kitchen table I'd bought secondhand years ago. It wobbled if you leaned on it too hard. I liked that. It reminded me that nothing was permanent unless you made it so. I opened the file. My grandmother, Ruth Parker, had been the quiet center of our family. She didn't dominate conversations. She didn't take sides publicly, but she watched. And when she spoke, people listened because she rarely wasted words. The will was written in clean, formal language, legal precise. I read it slowly once, then again. The Maple Crest house, transferred to Lauren. The lake cabin, assigned to Daniel. The majority share of Parker & Sons holdings, split between my parents during their lifetimes, then to Daniel as successor. Personal assets, jewelry, savings accounts, divided among descendants as deemed appropriate. And then near the end, a sentence that felt like it had been slipped in quietly, hoping no one would linger. Evelyn Parker is to receive the sum of $1. I didn't gasp. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel surprised. I felt confirmed. My grandmother had died 8 months earlier. I had flown in for the funeral, taken unpaid time off, stood next to my mother while she cried and accepted condolences. At the reception, afterward, my father had squeezed my shoulder and said, "She would have been proud of you." At the time, I thought it meant something. Now I understood it differently. Proud didn't mean protected. I closed the laptop and sat there for a long sim listening to the hum of the refrigerator. There was a strange relief in finally knowing where I stood. Ambiguity is exhausting. Clarity, even cruel clarity, frees up energy. The wedding was in 4 days. I still went to the maid of honor brunch, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to see how far the performance would go. Lauren hugged me when I arrived, her perfume sharp and sweet. "There you are," she said. "I was worried you were upset about the office thing." "I'm fine," I said. She smiled. "I knew you'd understand. You've always been the mature one." There it was again, the language of dismissal disguised as praise. At the table, our aunts talked about centerpieces and seating charts. My mother discussed timelines like a project manager overseeing a controlled demolition. At one point, Lauren leaned close and lowered her voice. "I hope you're not mad about the house," she said. "Mom said you don't really care about stuff like that." I looked at her then, really looked. She wasn't malicious. She wasn't even defensive. She was comfortable. That was worse. "No," I said. "I don't care about the house." That wasn't entirely true. I cared about being excluded from decisions that affected my life. I cared about the pattern. But I had learned that correcting people like Lauren only made them confused, not accountable. That afternoon, I went for a walk instead of going home. I wandered without direction until I ended up in a quiet neighborhood near the old courthouse downtown. It was one of those buildings you pass 100 times without noticing, but once you do, it's impossible to unsee. Solid, unapologetic, built to last. I sat on a bench across the street and watched people come and go. Lawyers in suits, couples arguing quietly, a woman my age holding a folder like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I thought about my grandmother, about how she had asked me years ago to organize her paperwork because your mother rushes and you pay attention. I thought about the folder on my laptop, about the dollar, and then I did something I hadn't planned. I walked inside. The receptionist looked up. "Can I help you?" "Yes," I said. "I need to understand a will." She handed me a clipboard. "Fill this out. Someone will be with you shortly." That was the moment the shift began. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a decision made quietly with no witnesses. I met with a junior attorney named Marcus Hale. He was probably in his late 30s, hair already thinning, glasses slightly crooked. He didn't smile too much. I appreciated that. He read the document carefully, tapping his pen against the desk. "Did you know about this will before your grandmother passed?" "No," I said. "Were you present when it was drafted?" "No." "Did your grandmother ever discuss her intentions with you?" "She asked me to organize her documents," I said. "That's all." He leaned back. "This is unusual," he said. "Not impossible, but unusual, especially given your involvement in family affairs." "What does the dollar mean?" I asked. "It's a legal tactic," he said. "It's meant to show you weren't forgotten. It reduces the chance of contest." "So she didn't forget me," I said. "She excluded me." He didn't correct me. "Do I have options?" I asked. He nodded slowly. "Possibly, but it depends on what else exists. Drafts, notes, correspondence, anything that suggests undue influence or a change in intent." I thought of the shared folder, of the documents my grandmother had asked me to organize, of the way my mother had taken over her appointments in the last year of her life. "I might have access to some things," I said. "Then don't mention this conversation to anyone," Marcus said. "And don't confront your family. Not yet." I nodded. That night, I went back to my apartment and opened the old backups I had saved years ago. I hadn't thought much about them at the time. Just old habits. Keep copies. You never know. Inside was a scanned draft of a will dated 2 years earlier. In it, the house on Maple Crest was to be sold, and the proceeds divided equally among grandchildren, including me. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. They hadn't just pushed me aside. They had rewritten me out. The wedding was in 3 days, and I finally understood that silence had been my role, not my nature. The question was no longer whether I would speak. It was how. I didn't sleep the night after I found the earlier draft of the will, not because I was panicking, but because my mind had shifted into a different mode. A quiet, alert state. The kind you enter when you stop asking why and start asking how. I printed the old draft and placed it in a plain folder. No labels, no emotion, just paper. The wedding rehearsal was the next evening. A full run-through at the church, followed by a dinner at my parents' house. I considered not going. Then I realized that absence would be interpreted as guilt or bitterness. Presence, on the other hand, could pass unnoticed. So I went. The church smelled like polished wood and old flowers. Lauren practiced walking down the aisle, with my father laughing when she missed a step. My mother corrected the florist. Daniel adjusted his tie in the reflection of a stained glass window. No one asked how I was doing. At one point, Lauren pulled me aside near the back pews. "You seem quiet," she said. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I replied. She studied my face for a moment, as if trying to decide whether to believe me. Then she smiled and said, "Good. I'd hate for there to be drama. You know how Mom gets." I did know. Dinner afterward was louder. Wine flowed. My father told stories about Lauren as a child. Stories I had also lived through, but was never mentioned in. Daniel talked about expansion plans for the company, using phrases I recognized, phrases I had written. "Things are really stabilizing," he said. "We've streamlined operations." I nodded and took a sip of water. My grandmother's chair at the table was empty. It always was now, but that night it felt deliberate. After dessert, my mother asked me to help her in the kitchen. She closed the door behind us and leaned against the counter. "You've been distant," she said. "I've been busy," I replied. "With what?" Her tone sharpened slightly, concern turning into suspicion. "Thinking," I said. She laughed softly. "You always did overthink things." I looked at her then. Really looked. At the familiar face that had guided me through childhood, corrected my posture, reminded me not to speak too loudly, too directly, too much. "I found Grandma's updated will," I said. The change was immediate. Her shoulders stiffened. Her eyes flicked to the door. "You weren't supposed to see that," she said. "I also found an earlier draft," I added. Silence stretched between us, thick, heavy. "That's not relevant anymore," she said finally. "People change their minds." "Did she?" I asked. My mother exhaled. "Evelyn, this is not the time." "When was the time?" I asked. "When she was sick. When you were managing her appointments. When decisions were being made without her present." Her face hardened. "You're imagining things." "I don't think I am." She stepped closer. "Listen to me," she said quietly. "Families don't survive by dragging everything into the light. Sometimes things are done for balance." "Balance for whom?" I asked. "For the whole," she said. "Lauren needs stability. Daniel needs authority. You don't need anything. You've always managed on your own." There it was again. The justification. Independence as an excuse for neglect. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I simply nodded. "You're right," I said. "This isn't the time." She relaxed slightly, reached out and squeezed my arm. "I'm glad you understand." That night, I sent Marcus Hale an email with the scanned draft attached. His reply came an hour later. "This changes things. Do not sign anything. Do not discuss this further. We need to move carefully." The wedding day arrived bright and cold. Late autumn sunlight, the kind that makes everything look sharper than it feels. I stood beside Lauren at the altar, holding her bouquet, while vows were exchanged. She cried. My mother cried. I didn't. At the reception, my father made a speech about legacy, about building something that lasts, about passing the torch. When the applause faded, he raised his glass again. And now he said a small announcement. My stomach tightened. We're pleased to share that Daniel will be formally stepping into his new role as managing director of Parker & Sons Holdings, effective immediately. Cheers. Applause. Congratulations. No mention of me, not even as a footnote. I clapped politely. Later that evening, Lauren pulled me into a hug. Thank you for today, she said. I know things have been weird. They have, I agreed. But we're family, she said. That never changes. I smiled faintly. Some things do. After the wedding, I took 2 days off work. Not because I needed rest, but because I needed distance. On the third day, I went back to the office to collect the rest of my things. My keycard still worked. No one had bothered to deactivate it. I packed quietly. A plant, a framed photo from a company retreat, my notebooks. As I was leaving, I ran into Grace Miller from accounting. She was nearing retirement, always polite, always observant. I heard about your role, she said softly. So did I replied. She hesitated. For what it's worth, your grandmother asked me once how to protect someone who doesn't know they're being pushed out. I froze. When? About a year ago, Grace said. She didn't say names, just that she was worried. My hands tightened around the box I was holding. Did she say anything else? I asked. Grace shook her head. Just that she hoped the right person would see what mattered before it was too late. That evening, Marcus called me. We can contest the will, he said. But there's more. If your removal from the company was tied to this restructuring, there may be leverage there too. I don't want revenge, I said. I didn't say revenge, he replied. I said leverage. I looked out my window at the city lights, at lives intersecting without knowing it. Okay, I said. What do we do first? We wait, he said. And we gather. I hung up and opened a new notebook. On the first page, I wrote one sentence. They assumed I wouldn't look back. I closed the notebook, already knowing they were wrong. Waiting turned out to be harder than I expected. Not because I was impatient, but because waiting forced me to full see my family clearly, without the comforting illusion that something might suddenly make sense. When you stop reacting, patterns emerge. And once you see them, you can't unsee them. I spent the first week after the wedding doing very little on the surface. I updated my resume, sent out a few applications, kept my routine intact. From the outside, I looked like someone regrouping after a job loss. From the inside, I was cataloging years of small moments that now felt like evidence. I started with my grandmother's things. She had lived in a modest condo on the edge of town, downsized years earlier after my grandfather passed. My mother had already gone through most of it, or so she said. But there were still boxes stacked in the storage unit downstairs, labeled in my grandmother's careful handwriting. I asked my mother if I could take a look. Why, she asked too quickly. I want some of her old letters, I said. Personal things. She hesitated, then waved her hand dismissively. Take whatever you want. Just don't make a mess. The storage unit smelled like dust and old paper. I sat on the concrete floor and opened boxes one by one. Tax documents, holiday cards, photos. And then, in a smaller box, tucked behind winter coats, I found a leather folder. Inside were handwritten notes. Not formal, not legal, just observations. Daniel talks like your father now. Confident. Too confident. Lauren doesn't ask. She assumes. Evelyn listens. That's rare. I read them slowly, my throat tightening with each line. At the bottom of one page was a sentence written more heavily, as if the pen had pressed harder. If they decide for her, it will not be because she agreed. I photographed everything. That evening I sent the images to Marcus. This is significant, he replied. Not definitive, but supportive, especially if combined with other proof. Other proof. The phrase echoed in my mind. 2 days later, Daniel called me. That alone was unusual. We hadn't spoken since the wedding. "Hey," he said. "Dad mentioned you stopped by Grandma's place." "I did," I said. He cleared his throat. "You know Mom's been under a lot of stress. I don't want things getting complicated." "Complicated how?" I asked. "Well," he said, choosing his words carefully, "you're not part of the company anymore. Digging around old stuff could be misinterpreted." I smiled to myself. "Misinterpreted by whom?" "By lawyers," he said. "By people who don't understand family dynamics." "I think lawyers understand dynamics very well," I replied. Silence. "I just want to keep the peace," he said finally. "I know," I said. "So do I." But peace, I was learning, often meant surrender. That weekend, my parents invited me over for Sunday dinner. I almost declined. Almost. The house on Maple Crest was already half packed with wedding gifts. New furniture in the living room. Lauren's taste, not my mother's. The transformation was underway. Dinner was polite, too polite. At one point, my father set down his fork and looked at me. So he said, "Have you thought about what you'll do next?" "I have," I said, and my mother asked. "I'm considering my options," I replied. Daniel snorted. "There's always consulting. You were good at that operational stuff." Operational stuff. As if I hadn't been running the spine of their business. "I'm also speaking with an attorney," I added calmly. My mother froze. My father frowned. "About what?" he asked. "About Grandma's will," I said. "And my termination." The word hung in the air. "We didn't terminate you," my father said sharply. "You were let go." "That's termination," I replied. "This is exactly what we didn't want," my mother said. "Conflict. Accusations." "I'm not accusing," I said. "I'm asking questions." "You always did that," she snapped. "Always had to understand everything. Sometimes trust is enough." I looked at her. Trust goes both ways. Lauren entered the room, then drawn by the raised voices. "What's going on?" "Nothing," my mother said quickly. "Evelyn's just processing." Lauren frowned at me. "You're not trying to contest Grandma's will, are you?" "I do." "Das dem dann im Nemme zum and bei my statum. I'm reviewing it," I said. Her eyes widened. "Why would you do that? That would hurt everyone." I nodded. "I know." Then why she pressed. "Because I matter," I thought. But what I said was, "Because being excluded without explanation hurts too." She shook her head. "This feels selfish." I smiled gently. "It probably does." That night, my phone buzzed with a text from my father. "We need to talk." Without lawyers. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my notebook and wrote down everything I remembered about the last year of my grandmother's life. Appointments my mother had taken over, conversations cut short, documents moved from one room to another, patterns. The next morning, Marcus called. "They're feeling the pressure," he said. "That's good, but also dangerous. They may try to get you to sign something, or offer a quiet settlement." "I won't," I said. "Good," he replied. "Because we're not ready yet." "What's next?" I asked. "We file a notice of intent to contest," he said. "Not the full challenge. Just enough to put them on record." I closed my eyes. Filing meant escalation. No more pretending this was a misunderstanding. "Do it," I said. An hour later, I received an email confirmation from the court. Notice filed. I sat back in my chair and exhaled slowly. I wasn't angry. I was focused. And somewhere deep inside, beneath years of compliance and careful silence, something steady had taken root. They had taken my position. They had taken my inheritance. What they hadn't taken was my ability to choose what happened next. And that realization changed everything. The notice of intent didn't explode the way people imagine legal actions do. There were no sirens, no dramatic confrontations, just a shift in temperature. Conversations became careful. Messages arrived wrapped in concern instead of affection. 2 days after the filing, my mother called. Her voice was softer than usual. "Evelyn," she said, "we need to resolve this before it damages the family." I let her finish the sentence in her own time. "You don't need to involve outsiders," she continued. "We can handle this privately." "By excluding me again?" I asked. She sighed. "Why are you doing this?" I considered the question. Not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to choose the right one. Because I was removed from decisions about my own life, I said. And because pretending that didn't happen would mean agreeing with it. There was a pause. "You're risking everything," she said. "No," I replied. "I already lost what mattered. I'm protecting what's left." She hung up shortly after that. The first formal response from their attorney arrived the next day. Polite, firm, predictable. They denied any undue influence, asserted my grandmother's full capacity, and framed my removal from the company as an independent business decision. Marcus forwarded it to me with a short note. "They're drawing a line. Good. Now we push slowly." Pushing, I learned, didn't mean shouting. It meant asking for records, medical appointments, email correspondence, financial transfers, meeting notes from Parker & Sons Holdings in the 6 months before my grandmother's will was updated. Discovery requests were sent, and that's when the silence broke in more personal ways. Daniel showed up at my apartment unannounced one evening. He looked tired, less confident than usual. "You didn't have to do this," he said, as soon as I opened the door. "I didn't invite him in." "I didn't have to be excluded either," I replied. He rubbed his forehead. "You're tearing things apart." "I didn't tear anything," I said. "I pulled on a loose thread." He laughed bitterly. "You think you're the victim here? You've always been fine. You don't need help." "That's not the same as not deserving fairness," I said. He looked at me, then really looked. And for a brief moment, I saw something close to fear. "What do you want?" he asked. The question surprised me, not because it was difficult, but because it was the first honest one. "I want acknowledgement," I said. "And I want what was taken, returned, or explained under oath." He shook his head. "Dad will never agree to that." "Then we'll let a judge decide," I said. He left without another word. A week later, discovery responses began to arrive. Most were bland, redacted, carefully curated. But one stood out, an email thread between my mother and the family attorney, dated 3 weeks before the updated will. She wrote, "Evelyn is capable, but unpredictable. We need to ensure continuity." The attorney replied, "Understood. We can structure the documents to minimize future challenges." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Capable but unpredictable. It was the sentence that had followed me my entire life, finally written down. Marcus called within minutes of receiving the same file. "This is important," he said. "It establishes intent." "Intent to exclude," I said. "Yes," he replied. "And to anticipate your reaction." The next discovery package contained something else. Meeting minutes from Parker & Sons Holdings. A closed session with my parents and Daniel. Agenda Item 3. Succession planning. Notes indicated that my role would be sunset, to reduce internal conflict. I had been managed out, not because I was ineffective, but because my presence complicated their plans. I forwarded everything to Marcus. He replied with one line. "Now we have leverage." The pressure escalated quickly after that. My father left me a voicemail. "This isn't who you are," he said. "You're better than this." Better than defending myself, he meant. Lauren sent a long message about family loyalty, about how Grandma wouldn't want this, about how public records would embarrass everyone. I didn't respond. Instead, I met Marcus in his office to go over next steps. "We can proceed to a formal will contest," he said. "Or we can negotiate." "What would negotiation look like?" I asked. "A mediated settlement," he said. restoration of your share, possibly reinstatement in the company, or a buyout. I thought about the office, the desk, the role I had filled. I don't want to go back, I said. He nodded. That's wise. Then we proceed, I said. The mediation was scheduled for the following month. In the meantime, something unexpected happened. Grace Miller from accounting emailed me. She had retired early. I thought you should know she wrote that your grandmother asked me to make copies of some documents and keep them safe. She said you'd know when to ask. Attached were scans of handwritten notes, more detailed this time. They referenced meetings my mother had attended without my grandmother present, decisions made for her benefit, changes she had questioned but been told were necessary. One line stood out. If they're afraid of Evelyn, it's because she sees clearly. I sat back in my chair and closed my eyes. They had always mistaken my silence for blindness. The mediation date approached. Tension tightened like a wire pulled too far. And then 2 nights before the session, my mother sent one last message. If you go through with this, you're no longer part of this family. I read it once, then I placed my phone face down on the table. I didn't reply, not because it didn't hurt, but because for the first time, I understood something with absolute clarity. I had already been excluded. The only difference now was that I had chosen to see it. The mediation was held in a low-rise building near the river, the kind of neutral place designed to drain emotion from the room before anyone even speaks. Beige walls, soft lighting, bottled water lined up like a peace offering no one intended to accept. I arrived early with Marcus. He carried a slim briefcase. I carried nothing but my notebook. My parents arrived together. My mother wore a gray suit she reserved for serious matters. My father avoided my eyes. Daniel came separately, phone already in hand, as if he might need to leave at any moment. Lauren wasn't there. That absence was deliberate. The mediator, a woman named Helen Ortiz, introduced herself and explained the process in a calm, rehearsed voice. Confidential, voluntary, non-binding unless agreed upon. In other words, a performance of civility. They spoke first. Their attorney framed the situation as a misunderstanding fueled by grief. My grandmother's wishes were clear. My removal from the company was unrelated. They expressed concern for my well-being. I listened without reacting. When it was my turn, Marcus looked at me. Do you want to speak? Yes, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue their points. I simply stated facts. I was removed from my role. Without notice, I said. I was excluded from estate decisions. Documents show intent to prevent my involvement. I'm here to correct that. My mother shook her head. You're rewriting history. No, I said. I'm reading it. The mediator asked what resolution I sought. I want my share of the estate, as outlined in the earlier draft, I said, and a financial separation from the family business. My father leaned forward. That draft was never finalized. Because it was replaced, I said. Not because it was invalid. They asked for a break. When we reconvened, their offer was placed on the table. A lump sum, less than my original share, in exchange for withdrawing the contest and signing a non-disclosure agreement. Marcus didn't even look at me. He knew the answer. No, I said. My mother's composure cracked. You're doing this out of spite. I'm doing this because silence was mistaken for consent, I replied. The mediator called the session. As we were leaving, my father touched my arm. This ends badly, he said. For whom I asked. He didn't answer. 2 weeks later, the formal will contest was filed. Public record. The shift was immediate. Family friends stopped calling. Invitations disappeared. My parents' social circle closed ranks. But something else opened. People I hadn't heard from in years reached out quietly. A cousin who had been cut off. An aunt who had been sidelined. Stories echoed my own. Patterns repeated. During discovery for the contest, we uncovered financial transfers from my grandmother's accounts to cover company expenses during a downturn. Transfers authorized by my mother. Technically legal, ethically questionable. It establishes dependency, Marcus said. And influence. The court scheduled a preliminary hearing. That night, I sat in my apartment, surrounded by boxes I hadn't unpacked since moving. My life felt suspended, not paused, but mid-fall. I thought about my grandmother again, about how she had trusted me with her papers, about how she had tried quietly to leave me a path. I opened my notebook and wrote one sentence. They thought I'd disappear if they removed my place. The hearing was brief, procedural, but the judge's tone was firm. This court takes allegations of undue influence seriously, she said. The matter will proceed. Afterward, outside the courthouse, a reporter asked my parents for comment. They declined. I walked past without stopping. Later that day, my mother sent a message. You've made your choice. I typed a response, then deleted it. Instead, I wrote something else in my notebook. I didn't choose conflict. I chose myself. The case moved forward, and with it, the slow, irreversible shift from daughter to plaintiff, from silence to record, from being managed to standing on my own terms. The next chapter wouldn't be about what they took. It would be about what they underestimated. Once the case moved into full litigation, time stopped behaving normally. Days stretched, then collapsed into each other. There were weeks when nothing happened, followed by hours that carried the weight of years. I learned quickly that court battles aren't fueled by anger. They're fueled by endurance. The first deposition was my mother's. I didn't attend in person. Marcus advised against it. You don't need to watch this, he said. Let the record speak. But when the transcript arrived 2 days later, I read every word. She was calm, careful. She answered questions the way she had always spoken to me, with confidence that bordered on certainty. Yes, she managed my mother's appointments. Yes, she communicated regularly with the family attorney. No, she never pressured my grandmother. When asked why my grandmother's long-standing estate plan was altered, she said she wanted to simplify things. Simplify. It was the word she used when she didn't want to explain. The attorney pressed. Why was Evelyn Parker's share reduced to $1? A pause. I believe she wanted to avoid conflict, my mother replied. Evelyn is sensitive. Sensitive? Another word. Another shield. The next deposition was Daniel's. He struggled more. He contradicted himself on dates. He referred to decisions he claimed not to remember making. When asked about the internal email describing me as capable but unpredictable, he said he didn't recall seeing it, but the metadata said otherwise. Then came the deposition I hadn't expected. Lauren asked to testify voluntarily. Marcus called me as soon as he heard. This could cut either way, he said. Are you ready for that? I've been ready my whole life, I replied. I didn't read her transcript right away. I waited a day, then another. When I finally opened it, I was surprised. She cried. She talked about pressure, about expectations, about being told that I didn't need help, that I was strong, that I would understand. I didn't realize what was being taken, she said. I thought it was just rearranging things. Rearranging. I closed the document and stared at the wall. For the first time, I felt something close to grief. Not for what I lost, but for what had never been possible between us. The court ordered a forensic review of my grandmother's finances. That was the turning point. Because once outsiders begin to trace numbers, stories lose their power. Transfers were mapped, timing aligned, patterns emerged. Money flowed from my grandmother's accounts to cover company expenses during a critical period. Decisions that coincided with increased influence over her estate. Not illegal, but not clean. Marcus called me late one evening. They're worried, he said. How can you tell? I asked. They requested another mediation, he replied. This time, with revised terms. The offer was better. Full restoration of my share. Additional compensation. No admission of wrongdoing. Why now? I asked. Because they're losing control of the narrative, he said. I thought about my mother's text, about family loyalty, about what silence had cost me. No, I said. We go to judgment. He didn't argue. The trial date was set. But mamas for early the spring. In the meantime, my personal life continued in strange, uneven ways. I found freelance work, consulting, temporary, but enough. I met friends for coffee, walked the city, lived between court filings. One afternoon, I received a letter in the mail, handwritten, careful. It was from my Aunt Margaret, my mother's younger sister. We had never been close. She wrote about growing up under the same roof, about always being told to defer, about how my grandmother had once confided that she worried history was repeating itself. She ended the letter with one sentence. Don't let them tell you this is about money. It's about permission. I folded the letter and placed it in my notebook. The night before trial, I barely slept. Not from fear, but from awareness. This was the moment where everything I had been avoiding would be spoken aloud. In court, on record, under oath. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood-paneled, quiet, formal without being grand. My parents sat across the aisle. Daniel beside them. Lauren 2 rows back. When the judge entered, everyone stood. The opening statements were restrained. Marcus focused on facts, on timing, on influence. Their attorney spoke about family disagreement, about grief, about misunderstanding. Then witnesses were called. Grace Miller testified about my grandmother's concerns. The forensic accountant presented charts. Emails were read aloud. When the capable but unpredictable line was entered into evidence, my mother looked down. Then it was my turn. I took the stand. I didn't dramatize. I didn't embellish. I spoke the way I had learned to speak, when I wanted to be heard without being dismissed. I talked about my role in the company, about being removed without notice, about discovering the will after the fact. I talked about silence, about how being the responsible one often meant being the invisible one. The judge listened. When cross-examined, their attorney asked, "Isn't it true you've always been independent?" "Yes," I said. "And capable of supporting yourself?" "Yes." "So why does this matter so much?" I looked at him. "Because independence doesn't cancel out fairness," I said. "And being capable doesn't mean being disposable." There was no reaction in the room, no gasp, no whisper. But I felt it shift. After court adjourned that day, I walked outside into the cold air and breathed deeply. Whatever happened next, the story was no longer being told without me. And for the first time, that felt like enough to stand on. The second week of trial was quieter on the surface and heavier underneath. The courtroom filled and emptied with a rhythm that felt almost ritualistic. Sit, stand, speak, record. Every word now belonged to the record, not to memory, not to interpretation. That alone felt like a kind of justice. What I hadn't expected was how tired everyone would look. My parents arrived each morning with the same rigid posture, as if holding themselves upright required constant effort. Daniel stopped checking his phone. Lauren rarely looked up. Even their attorney had begun to sound less certain, his questions shorter, his pauses longer. Facts have a way of doing that. The judge called for additional testimony from the family attorney who had overseen my grandmother's estate. He was a careful man, used to precision. But precision doesn't always protect you when context shifts. Marcus asked him to walk through the timeline again. Dates, meetings, revisions. Was Evelyn Parker present at any of these discussions? Marcus asked. No, the attorney replied. Was she informed? No. Was there a reason she was excluded? A pause. It was my understanding that the family wished to minimize future disputes. By excluding one party entirely, Marcus asked. The attorney hesitated. That was the instruction given. By whom? Marcus pressed. The answer came quietly. By Mrs. Parker. My mother didn't react. not outwardly, but something in her face settled like a door closing. Later that afternoon, the judge requested a brief recess. When we reconvened, she addressed the room directly. "This court is not tasked with repairing families," she said, "but it is tasked with examining whether influence was exercised in a manner inconsistent with free intent." She looked at my mother. "That question remains open." That night, I walked home instead of taking the bus. The city felt sharper than usual, colder, more real. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't relieved. I felt suspended between two versions of myself: the daughter I had been trained to be, and the woman who had chosen not to disappear. At my apartment, I found a message waiting. From Lauren. "Can we talk just us?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I replied, "Tomorrow." We met at a small cafe halfway between our neighborhoods. Neutral ground. She arrived early, hands wrapped around a mug she wasn't drinking from. "You look tired," she said. "So do you," I replied. She nodded. "I didn't realize it would be like this." "Like what?" "So exposed," she said. "I thought this was about paperwork, technicalities. And now I asked." She hesitated. "Now I see how much was decided without you." I waited. "I didn't question it," she said quietly. "They told me you'd be fine, that you didn't need anything." "I know," I said. "I should have asked," she said. "I should have said something." "Yes," I replied. "You should have." She flinched slightly. "Do you hate me?" I considered the question. "No," I said. "But I don't trust you the way I used to." She nodded slowly, as if she had expected that. "What happens if you win?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. "I get what was taken. I don't get back what was withheld." She looked down. "Mom says you're tearing the family apart." I took a breath. Families that rely on silence aren't held together. They're held down. She didn't argue. When we stood to leave, she reached out, then stopped herself. "I hope you get what you need," she said. "So do I replied. Back in court, the final witnesses were called. A medical professional testified about cognitive decline patterns. Not definitive, but suggestive. Emails were revisited. The timing emphasized. And then something unexpected happened. The judge requested an in-chambers conference with both legal teams. We waited in the hallway. Time slowed. Every footstep echoed. Marcus came back alone. "She's considering a partial ruling," he said, "on the issue of influence." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means she may rule that the will is invalid," he said, "and order a reversion to the previous version." My chest tightened. "And the business?" I asked. "That's separate," he said, "but related." When court resumed, the judge spoke carefully. "This court finds sufficient evidence to question the validity of the final will," she said. "A ruling will be issued." My mother closed her eyes. But the judge wasn't finished. Additionally, she continued, "The court will review the circumstances surrounding Ms. Parker's removal from Parker & Sons Holdings as they pertain to financial dependency and influence." I felt the air leave the room. That night, my father called me for the first time since mediation. His voice was unsteady. "This has gone too far," he said. "It went too far when decisions were made. Without me," I replied. "We built this family," he said. "We sacrificed." "So did I." I said. "I just didn't announce it." There was silence. "You always had to make things complicated," he said finally. "No," I replied. "I just stopped simplifying them for everyone else." He hung up. The ruling was scheduled for the following Friday. I barely slept the night before. Not from fear, from anticipation. This was the edge of something irreversible. In the morning, I dressed simply. No armor, no performance. The courtroom filled quickly. The judge entered, and as she began to read, I realized something important. Whatever she said next would change the structure of my family. But I had already changed myself, and that meant I would survive the outcome no matter which way it fell. The question wasn't whether I would be restored. It was what they would lose, once the truth was no longer negotiable. The judge didn't rush. She adjusted her glasses, straightened the papers in front of her, and let the room settle into silence before she spoke. It was the kind of pause that made every breath feel too loud. This court has reviewed the evidence, she began, including testimony correspondence, financial records, and expert analysis. I folded my hands in my lap. I wasn't praying. I was listening. It is the finding of this court, she continued, that the final version of Ruth Parker's will was executed under conditions that raised substantial concerns regarding undue influence. My mother stiffened. Daniel stared straight ahead. Lauren's hands flew to her mouth. Accordingly, the judge said the will, dated October 14th, is hereby declared invalid. The words landed without ceremony. No gavel, no flourish. The estate shall revert to the previous valid version, dated March 3rd, 2 years prior. For a moment, I didn't feel anything at all. It was as if my body needed time to catch up with what my mind already understood. Then the judge went on. This ruling does not imply criminal intent, she said, looking directly at my mother. But it does establish that decisions were made in a manner inconsistent with the testator's independent intent. She paused again. As for the related matter of Ms. Evelyn Parker's removal from Parker & Sons Holdings, the court finds that the timing and circumstances warrant further review in civil proceedings. Not finished, not absolved, just opened. The judge closed the file. This court is adjourned. That was it. No applause, no outburst, just the quiet shuffling of chairs and papers, as if everyone had been holding something fragile and could finally set it down. Outside the courtroom, people clustered in small groups. Lawyers spoke in low voices. Someone brushed past me and murmured congratulations. I didn't respond. My parents didn't approach me. Neither did Daniel. Lauren did. She stood in front of me, eyes red, makeup smudged. I didn't think she'd actually do it, she said. She didn't do it, I replied. The evidence did. She nodded slowly. Mom's not taking it well. I imagine not, I said. She says you humiliated her. I looked at Lauren. I told the truth in a courtroom. That's not humiliation. That's consequence. Lauren swallowed. What happens now? I considered that. Now I said things get reorganized properly. That afternoon, Marcus and I met to discuss next steps. The reversion of the will meant my share of the estate would be restored. The house on Maple Crest would be sold, proceeds divided, assets recalculated. It would take months. And the company, I asked. Marcus leaned back. Now we have leverage. Wrongful termination tied to influence and financial dependency. It won't be quick, but it's strong. I nodded. Proceed. That evening, my mother finally called. Her voice was brittle. Are you satisfied now? No, I said. But I am clear. You've destroyed everything, she said. Your grandmother would be ashamed. I closed my eyes. Don't speak for her, I said. She trusted me. That's why this happened. You always had to win, she snapped. No, I replied. I just stopped losing quietly. She hung up. The following weeks were administrative and strange. Appraisers came and went. Accountants recalculated. Lawyers exchanged letters thick with language that turned family history into figures and footnotes. At Parker & Sons Holdings, tension escalated. Investors asked questions. A former employee reached out anonymously, confirming that my removal had been discussed months in advance. Your name was always followed by the word risk, the email said. I forwarded it to Marcus. Daniel resigned from his position 2 weeks later. Officially, it was to pursue other opportunities. Unofficially, the board had lost confidence. My father stopped going into the office altogether. One afternoon, I received a message from Grace Miller. I'm glad you stood your ground, she wrote. Ruth would be too. I sat at my kitchen table and let that settle. The company lawsuit moved forward. Mediation was attempted again this time, with very different energy. They offered a buyout, a clean separation, a formal acknowledgement of my contributions. I accepted, not because it was generous, but because it was final. The papers were signed on a Tuesday morning. When I left the building, I didn't look back. That night, I walked through my apartment, touching the walls, the furniture, the quiet. It all felt different. Not bigger, not better, mine. The next chapter wouldn't be about courtrooms or documents. It would be about what comes after you reclaim your name and stop waiting for permission to use it. After the papers were signed and the funds transferred, the noise didn't stop the way I thought it would. It changed shape. For weeks, my life had revolved around deadlines, filings, hearings. There had always been a next step, a next document, a next moment that required precision. When that structure disappeared, I felt unsteady in a way that had nothing to do with fear. Victory is disorienting when you never planned your life around winning. I took a week off from everything. No consulting work, no meetings. I slept late, cooked simple meals, walked without a destination. People imagine freedom as relief. What it actually feels like at first is emptiness, the kind that forces you to confront what you've been postponing. One afternoon, I went to the lake cabin. It hadn't been sold yet. The estate process was still ongoing, and legally, I had access now. I hadn't been there since my early 20s, back when weekends meant laughter and rules were looser. The place smelled like pine and dust. I opened windows, let the cold air move through. In the back bedroom, I found an old box under the bed, photo albums, letters, my grandmother's handwriting again. I sat on the floor and read. Some letters were to friends I didn't know. Others were drafts never sent. Thoughts she hadn't known how to voice. I did what I could with what I had. I just hope she doesn't mistake my silence for approval. That sentence stayed with me. I realized then that what had hurt most wasn't the money or the job. It was the assumption, the belief that because I didn't protest, I agreed. Because I didn't demand, I didn't need. Because I didn't collapse, I wasn't affected. Silence had been read as weakness. I stayed at the cabin overnight, built a fire, made soup, slept deeply for the first time in months. When I returned to the city, I accepted a short-term consulting contract with a mid-size logistics firm. Temporary, clean, no family ties. I worked, delivered results, left. It felt healthy. Then unexpectedly, my father called. He sounded older, smaller. "I hear you're doing well," he said. "I am," I replied. He hesitated. "Your mother, she's not." "I'm sorry," I said. "And I meant it in the way you mean things that are true, but no longer yours to fix." "She feels betrayed," he said. "So did I replied. Silence. "I didn't think it would go this far," he admitted. "That's the problem," I said gently. "You didn't think about me at all." He didn't argue. A week later, I received an email from the board of Parker & Sons Holdings. Not an apology, not quite. A formal acknowledgement of my role in stabilizing operations during critical periods included as part of public corporate disclosures. They needed to clean their history. I allowed it, not for recognition, but because records matter. Lauren tried again. She asked if we could start over. Slowly, carefully. I told her the truth. "We can have a relationship," I said, "but not the one we had." That one depended on me staying quiet. She agreed, or said she did. Time would tell. My mother didn't reach out again. I thought that would hurt more than it did. But grief, I learned, doesn't always look like sadness. Sometimes it looks like acceptance, arriving earlier than expected. One evening, as I was organizing my files, I found the notebook I had started months earlier, the one where I wrote sentences instead of plans. I flipped to the last blank page and wrote, "Being chosen last taught me how to choose myself first." I closed it and put it away. The next chapter of my life wasn't dramatic. There were no headlines, no courtroom speeches, just decisions made deliberately, boundaries enforced without explanation. But something was still unfinished, not legally, internally, and I knew it would surface soon. Soon. The quiet didn't last, not because my family returned with new demands, but because silence has a way of bringing unresolved truths to the surface once there's finally space for them. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. I was finishing a report for a client when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. Something in me hesitated, then answered. "Evelyn Parker," a woman asked. "Yes, my name is Nora Whitman. I'm calling in regard to your grandmother, Ruth Parker." My spine straightened. "What about her?" "I'm a licensed fiduciary," she said. "I worked with your grandmother independently during the last year of her life. She asked me to contact you if certain conditions were met." "What conditions?" I asked. "If the final version of her will was contested," Nora replied, "and if you were excluded without explanation." I closed my laptop slowly. "She left something for you," Nora continued. "Not part of the estate. It was held separately. We met 2 days later in a small office above a credit union. No drama, no ceremony." Nora was in her late 50s, precise professional. She slid a folder across the desk. "Your grandmother anticipated interference," she said. She was clearer than people gave her credit for. Inside the folder was a trust document. Not large, not symbolic, specific. A modest fund set aside years earlier, legally insulated, earmarked for one purpose only. Legal protection. She told me Nora said that if you ever needed to defend yourself, you shouldn't have to choose between justice and survival. Yes. "She didn't want you to know unless you needed it," Nora added. "She hoped you never would." I nodded. She knew I would. Nora gave a small smile. She did. I left the office with a folder tucked under my arm and sat in my car for a long time without starting it. All this time, I had wondered if my grandmother had seen what was happening, or if I had been alone in it. I hadn't been. That knowledge settled something deep in my chest. That evening, I went through my files one last time. Court transcripts, settlement agreements, notes. I shredded what no longer mattered. Then I wrote one final letter, not to my parents, not to Lauren, to myself. I wrote about the cost of being agreeable, about the danger of earning love through usefulness, about how easily family becomes a structure that rewards silence and punishes clarity. I didn't romanticize it. I didn't soften it. I told the truth. A week later, my father emailed me again. "Your mother is considering selling the house sooner than planned. She says she can't bear the memories." I read the message, then deleted it. Some losses don't require commentary. At work, a junior consultant asked me how I learned to stay calm under pressure. I thought about courtrooms, about kitchens, about years of being talked over. "I learned to pause before responding," I said, "and to decide whether the explanation was worth the cost." She nodded, writing it down as if it were advice about productivity. It wasn't. It was survival. One night, I dreamed of my grandmother. She was sitting at the small kitchen table. From my childhood, hands folded, watching me without urgency. "You did fine," she said. I woke up calm. The last hearing, related to the estate, concluded quietly. No appearances required. Final documents filed. When it was over, it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a release. I stood in my apartment windows, open city sounds drifting in, and realized something simple and sharp. I was no longer reacting to my family. I was living my own timeline, and that meant the story was almost finished. The last thing left was to say it out loud. The last thing I did before closing this chapter was tell the truth without expecting anything in return. Not an apology, not understanding, not reconciliation, just truth spoken once clearly and then released. It happened at Thanksgiving. I hadn't planned to go. I had every reason not to, but something in me wanted to mark the ending properly, not with distance, but with presence on my own terms. I arrived early, not to help, not to prepare, just to arrive. The house on Maple Crest was quieter than it used to be. Fewer decorations, fewer voices. The furniture was already being measured for sale. You could feel it, a place preparing to be emptied. My parents were there. Lauren too. Daniel wasn't. No one hugged me. No one told me to leave. We existed in the same room, like people who had shared a language and then forgotten the grammar. Dinner was polite, careful, the kind of conversation that avoids pronouns. At one point, my mother stood to refill her glass and said almost to herself, "I never thought it would end like this." I set my fork down. "This didn't end," I said calmly. "It concluded." She looked at me startled. "What do you mean?" my father asked. "I mean, nothing collapsed," I said. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was ruined. What happened was already there. I just stopped pretending it wasn't. Lauren shifted in her chair. "Do you really think we didn't love you?" I looked at her. "I think you love the version of me that made things easier." Silence followed. Not explosive, heavy. "I'm not here to punish anyone," I continued. "I'm here because I don't want to carry this anymore." My mother's voice was thin. "So what do you want from us now?" I shook my head. Nothing. That was the truth. Clean. Uncomplicated. "I wanted fairness," I said. "I wanted honesty. I wanted the right to choose my own life without being managed or minimized. I have that now." My father cleared his throat. "You could have talked to us." "I did," I replied. "For years. I just did it quietly." No one argued. I stood up, picked up my coat, and looked at them one last time. As a group, not as a hierarchy. "I hope you find peace," I said. "But I'm done negotiating my worth." I left before dessert. Outside, the air was cold and steady. I walked to my car without rushing, without checking my phone, without waiting to be called back. Driving home, I thought about how many times I had imagined this moment differently. Louder, angrier, more dramatic. The reality was simpler. I had chosen myself. And that choice didn't need witnesses. In the months that followed, life settled into something solid. I took on longer-term consulting work, then partnered with 2 women I trusted to start a small advisory firm. We specialized in untangling messy transitions, family businesses, inheritances, quiet conflicts no one wanted to name. We were good at it, not because we enjoyed confrontation, but because we understood what happens when power hides behind affection. Lauren reached out occasionally. Sometimes we met for coffee. Sometimes we didn't. The relationship found its own shape, smaller, clearer. My parents moved to a smaller place across town. We spoke rarely, cordially, without illusions. I didn't hate them. I just stopped needing their approval. One evening, a client asked me why I did this kind of work. I thought about my grandmother, about the trust she set aside, about the notes she never showed anyone. "I do it," I said, "because people confuse silence with consent. And I know how expensive that mistake can be." She nodded, understanding more than she said. "The last thing I want to leave you with is this. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like boundaries. Sometimes it looks like paperwork. Sometimes it looks like walking away without explaining yourself one last time. Justice doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it comes with peace. If you've ever been excluded, overlooked, rewritten, or told you were strong enough not to need fairness, remember this. Strength isn't about enduring injustice quietly. It's about knowing when to stop. If this story resonated with you, if you've lived a version of it, or are standing at the edge of a choice like this, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment, share your story, and if you want more stories about boundaries, karma, and choosing yourself, stay with me.